most diverse garden vegetable because they come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Runner beans originated in Mexico and South America over 2,000 years ago, and formerly grown just for their look, fast-growing beans are the ideal garden vegetable for first-time growers. On today's show, I'll show you how to plant bush and pole beans. The two most popular types of beans are shell beans and snap beans. And snap beans include green, French, and string beans, and they're eaten for their tender pods. Shell beans, on the other hand, are grown not for their pods, but for the beans inside. And there are two basic growth habits of beans, bush and pole. Bush beans have a compact branch form and grow close to the ground. And pole beans are vining plants that need to climb a trellis or other support. Pole beans produce more pods per plant than bush beans, plus they're much easier to pick. There's no harm in growing several different varieties of beans in your garden. All beans are members of the legume family. Bush beans may have round or flat pods that vary in color from green to yellow to purple. Bush beans include such favorites as green, wax, Italian flat pods, French fillet, and purple types. Snap beans get their names from the sound they make when the pods are broken. The most dependable snap bean variety is the green pod provider. Dry shell beans grow like other bush beans, but have tough, stringy, bitter-tasting pods. Red kidney, navy, pinto, fava beans, and black beans are of this type. Some gardeners like bush beans better than pole beans because they produce a lot of pods in a short period of time and they don't need to be staked. But bush beans do take up more space in your garden since they tend to spread. I'm sowing a variety called Blue Lake. It has a plump bean and a tender pod, and it should be ready for harvest in about 60 days. Now, it's really easy to grow beans from seeds. In fact, it's recommended that you don't even start them indoors since beans don't like to be transplanted. But it is a good idea to prep your soil before you plant. And about 2 weeks ago, I added some general all-purpose fertilizer into this bed to get the seeds off to a good start. Now, when you sow your seeds, be careful that the soil is not too wet because beans will crack and not germinate well if it's too wet. But when I sow these seeds, I'll lightly water in the soil. To help speed up the germination process, I poured a layer of bean seeds into a jar with a screw top, and then I'd lightly sprayed them with water. I poured in another layer of seeds and misted with water until all the seeds were lightly coated.
Never soak your bean seeds before planting. Soaking the bean seeds to speed up germination may actually damage the seeds.
Next, I shook an inoculant called rhizobia over the bean seed. The inoculant is powdered bacteria that will help the seeds to better absorb nitrogen. Beans will produce really well with the help of soil-borne bacteria. Beans can actually pull nitrogen from the air and store it in their roots. After securing the top, I shook the jar until the seeds were coated with the black powder. You can find the inoculants at garden centers listed as legume inoculants. You should plant beans in full sun in a fertile, well-drained location. The beans should receive at least 6 hours of sunlight per day, and the soil temperature should be at least 60 degrees. Now, you don't need to sow bean seeds very thick because they tend to germinate well if the soil is not too wet. And a traditional way of planting beans is a double row method, where you have 2 rows 18 to 24 inches apart, which is what I'll do in this raised bed. To sow the seeds in double rows, I used the edge of a hoe to draw out a straight, shallow trench. Next, I inserted a soil thermometer into the ground about 2 to 3 inches. The temperature should be at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit, otherwise the soil will not create food for the plants. I then sowed the seed along the trench, placing 1 to 2 seeds about 1 inch deep in the soil. Seeds planted too deeply may not sprout. You might want to sow sparingly to reduce the amount of thinning that will have to be done later. I used my hands to pull the soil over the seed and gently tamp down the soil along the row. I used a garden hose equipped with a misting nozzle to lightly mist the seeds. It's always a good idea to use a label or a marker to identify what you just planted. Now, for information on this or any other topics we cover on the show, visit our website at DIYnetwork.com. You'll find lots of helpful information under the gardening section, or you can search our site by project type for specific how-to details. Now, coming up next, you'll learn how to plant pole beans alongside your bush beans to turn your garden into a great mixture of tall bean stock that would make even Jack proud. You'll also learn how to construct a teepee that's both functional and adds vertical structure to your garden, which will hold the pole bean vines in the plentiful crop to come. Stay tuned for more Fresh from the Garden. Fresh from the Garden. On today's show, I'm showing you how to plant bush beans and pole beans. Earlier in the show, I showed you how to plant the bush beans, and now I'm ready to show you how to plant the pole beans. Now, the gardening requirements that work for bush beans mostly work for pole beans, but the two types require slightly different care at planting to ensure the best growth. But the most obvious difference between the two is the height to which the pole beans grow. Now, pole beans make great use of vertical space since they'll grow on poles and trellises and homemade teepees. And pole beans have a longer growing season, and they're more tolerant of hot temperatures than bush beans, which is why they'll produce 2 to 3 times more fruit in the same amount of growing space. Now, bush beans will grow to a certain height, they'll flower and set fruit, but then they'll stop growing. Because pole beans quickly grow into large, heavy plants, it's best to install your trellis at the same time that you sow your seeds. Now, in order to avoid injuring the plant roots later, I'm constructing simple teepees by tying string together around several pieces of wood, and then I'll sow my seeds around the base of the teepee. I'll be using 14 1x2 cedar poles 6 feet long to make 3 teepees for the pole beans. The poles should be 1 to 2 inches in diameter or width with rough surfaces. This works better than a smooth surface. The rough surface makes it easier for the beans to climb the poles. I placed the first pole along the side of the bed 12 inches from the end. Then I measured 3 feet from the first pole and placed the second pole. I repeated the same steps on the other side of the bed. Next, I moved to the other end of the bed and repeated the same steps. For the third teepee, I just centered it between the first 2. I pulled the 4 poles together, overlapping their ends 8 inches to form a cone. Using twine, I tightly lashed the poles together where they intersected. To give extra support to the teepees, I added a cross support at the top and tied them to the teepees using the twine.
An old technique for trellising pole beans is to plant your beans with corn. The corn stalks support the bean vines, and the beans supply the nitrogen to the soil, which makes the corn grow tall and strong.
The teepee should be strong enough to withstand strong winds and rain. And be sure that you locate your teepee where it's not going to shade out other plants that require full sun. Now, if you prefer, you can purchase teepee-style supports like this at a garden center, but you could just as easily make them by lashing together some saplings or pieces of bamboo. Here's one more tip. Don't use chicken wire or fence that has lots of wires or mesh as the support. Horizontal wires cause the vines to wrap around each other and choke. To start planting, I use my finger to push the seeds about 1 inch into the soil. I sowed 5 to 6 seeds around each pole 6 to 8 inches away from the base. This is more seeds than I'll need for each pole, but it allows me to come back after the seeds have germinated to thin out the weakest plants. I decided to plant Kentucky Wonder Seed, which will grow pods about 6 to 7 inches long. This variety of bean produces a round, flavorful pod. I then used my hands to cover the seeds with 1 inch of soil and to lightly tamp the soil. Finally, I used a garden hose to lightly mist the dry soil. As vegetables grow from seeds to seedlings to plants, the watering needs change, and beans need very little care except for some regular weeding and watering when the ground gets dry, and they prefer about 1 inch of water per week. Now, it's best to water in the morning so the foliage has a chance to dry before dark. And there's a number of different ways that you can water, but 2 of my favorites are to use soaker hoses, which saturate the ground with water right at the root zone, and these watering wands, which allow you to pinpoint a soft flow of water right at the base of the plants, and you don't have to bend over. Well, I planted my bush and my pole beans about 30 days ago. Bush beans mature in 50 to 60 days and pole beans in 60 to 90 days. And beans are light feeders, which means you don't need to supplement the fertilization if you've enriched the soil like I have. Otherwise, they can benefit from a light fertilization every 2 weeks for the first 6 weeks. A good choice is to use an organic fertilizer like fish emulsion. If you do that, your plants ought to be good to go. Coming up, I'll show you how to cultivate and protect your bean plants from annoying weeds and pests that can reduce and even ruin your garden's yield. Then you'll see how to reap the benefits of the home garden by snapping and picking the beans. Fresh from the garden will return in a moment. Fresh from the garden. On today's show, I've added bush and pole beans to the garden. Now, earlier in the show, I showed you how to germinate seeds, and I even showed you how to get the bush beans off to a fast start by inoculating the seeds. Then I built the teepee supports for the pole beans. And lastly, I direct sowed the bush and the pole bean seeds. Well, the crops have come in quite nicely, but now it's time to do some cultivation. Weed control is really important, especially in the first few weeks after planting. because weeds compete for the sunlight and the water and the nutrients, and they also crowd out the young plants, making it difficult for some of them to even compete. So you want to get the weeds out as early as possible. And another reason to get the weeds out, if you let them go to seed, you'll have more weeds next year than you ever had this year. The best way to control weeds like these is through hoeing or hand cultivation with small hand tools like this, herbicides, selective or non-selective, and mulch. But you need to be really careful when you're working around tender plants, and especially beans, because they have shallow roots and a fairly weak root system. So any heavy hoeing could set your growing time back by disturbing the root system, thereby reducing your yields. When using a garden hoe, work only the top inch of the topsoil around the base of the plants, being careful not to disturb the roots. When you can, pulling tough weeds by hand is a good idea, but be careful. Be sure not to disturb the blossoms on vegetable plants when hand weeding. You should grasp the weeds close to the roots so that you're not breaking it off at the soil line.
Don't irrigate, fertilize, or mulch a freshly weeded garden until you've made sure that all the weeds have been removed. Leaving them in the garden will just let them start growing again.
I haven't had to do much weeding around my pole beans because when I built the teepees, I made sure that the area was free of weeds. And pole beans grow quickly, and they send out a lot of lush, dense foliage. This prevents the light from reaching the surface, which is what the weeds need to germinate. But I found the best long-term method for controlling weeds is simply to stay ahead of them. If you'll spend a few minutes every other day or so just focusing on the weeds, you'll keep them at bay, even in a garden this big. One other thing that may hamper the growth of your beans is pests. The peskiest of the pests for bush and pole beans is the Mexican bean beetle. The brown beetle with black spots that looks like a ladybug will chew the stem, pods, and leaves of the bean. To remove this pest, you can simply hand-pick the bug off the plant. Not every bug in your garden is a pest. Good bugs known as beneficials attack many foes in your garden, and one such friend is the spine soldier beetle or stink bug. And when it comes to favorite foods, the Mexican bean beetle is high on its list. Now this dark gray or brown stink bug is easily identified by its triangular etched marking on its back and its unusual broad shape. But it uses its spear-like mouth parts to pierce and suck the juice of the bugs they feed on. And they also attack a wide variety of bugs. And you can purchase these as nymphs or adults. But if you introduce them to your garden, just be sure to limit your use of pesticides. Disease is another concern to be aware of with beans, and moisture can spread the disease to the plants. So make sure you mulch around the base of the plants and avoid working around them when they're wet, because diseases like bean mosaic virus and bacterial blight can be spread by handling the wet leaves. But a good way to minimize this risk is to buy disease-resistant plants. But just note I said disease-resistant. It doesn't make them disease-proof. Bush beans are ready to pick in 45 to 60 days and pole beans in 60 to 85 days. Now bush bean varieties are ready 2 to 3 weeks after the blooms first appear. And some of the newer varieties have been developed to set a lot of pods all at once, making for a more concentrated harvest. You should harvest bush snap beans when pods are about 4 to 6 inches long. The pods should be long, slender, and velvety. They should snap quickly, but the tip should still be pliable. Beans that stay on the plant too long are much less tender and flavorful. If you leave them unpicked even longer, the plant will stop producing new beans.
The easiest way to harvest beans is to grasp the pod between your thumb and forefinger and pull. Be careful not to knock off the blooms so that you can have more beans later.
Pole beans should also be harvested when they're 4 to 6 inches long, but before the beans inside have started to swell. Pole beans tend to stay tender on the vine longer than bush beans, but regular picking is still required to extend the harvest. You should pick every couple of days. If not, you may find yourself with a glut of beans. When you have all the beans you need, you can let the remaining pods mature on the vine and use them as shell beans. Removing dead foliage and watering deeply goes a long way to helping you get more pods. Because beans are light feeders, they don't need a lot of fertilizer, but some routine housekeeping will help you get 2 and sometimes 3 pole bean crops per season from one planting of vines. All bush beans exhaust themselves after 2 or 3 heavy pickings, so it's best to just pull these up and compost them once the flowering and pod setting have stopped. Beans don't store well, so they should be eaten right after they're harvested, which to me is one of the best reasons about growing your own vegetables, because nothing tastes better than vegetables in your garden one minute and on your kitchen table the next. But for the beans that you do store, the best method is freezing, although at one point they were actually stored in salt. But for best taste, canning and freezing should be done within just a few hours after picking the beans. When it comes to storing beans, pole beans freeze very well and they keep a firmer texture than bush beans. And snap beans will be kept fresh in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 weeks, while runner beans can remain fresh in the refrigerator for about a week. But if you're storing beans in the refrigerator, just be sure that you use a perforated plastic bag so they'll stay fresh. Beans are a fun vegetable to grow with children also, and many adults can trace their love for gardening back to their childhood. When we come back, we'll show a few fun and easy ways to pique a child's interest with other vegetables grown fresh from the garden. From the garden. Once you start gardening outdoors, one of your greatest helpers will be children of all ages. Not only is it educational, but it's fun. And as we all know, most children love to play in the dirt. And it's also a great opportunity for them to learn firsthand the joys of gardening and possibly develop a passion that will last a lifetime. For young gardeners, it's important to choose seeds that are large enough for them to easily handle, but yet grow fast enough to keep children mesmerized, like these pumpkin seeds. They can watch the small seeds grow into giant pumpkins. And another way to keep their interest is to plant vegetables that produce fruit that grow so fast, like zucchini, that some gardeners say you can actually sit in the garden and watch them grow. One of the easiest ways to grow little gardeners is by starting them off with container gardening. Container gardens come in all shapes and sizes. You could use anything from a cup to a barrel. Just let your child use their imagination. A little gardener could grow sugar peas in a window box or tomatoes in a bucket on a deck. The most important thing to remember is to pick a vegetable that will grow quickly. One of the fastest and most dependable and very easy to grow vegetable is the radish. Just plant the seeds and in a few short days they'll sprout, showing off their green tops and fascinating even the most impatient preschooler. Radishes aren't just red. The Easter egg variety of radish will amaze children, as you never know what color of radish is hiding beneath the soil until the roots are harvested. Children can be a big help when it comes to harvest time in your garden. Okay guys, remember what I said. Keep twisting until they come off and find me some really pretty ones, okay?
Okay.
They'll get a big kick out of picking brightly colored yellow and red bell peppers or tomatoes fresh from the vine. And if you grow pumpkins, they'll really love picking out their own special ones to carve at Halloween time. Okay, how we doing? One special pumpkin treat for children is letting them select a pumpkin from the patch to call their own. Then you can have lots of fun working with your child making a jack-o'-lantern. You do the hard work. Cut the top out and then let your child help spoon out the pumpkin contents. Next, using a marker, let your child draw a face on the pumpkin. Cut out the drawing, place a candle inside, and set it at the front door for everyone to see. Even after the harvest is over, there are a lot of fun and different ways to keep a child interested in gardening. If you've ever grown corn in your garden, you may not realize that you've got the makings using husk and stalks to create cute dolls like this. Or you could turn an adventure out of collecting foliage and leaves in your garden into making colorful pictures and placemats. Once you've collected a variety of leaves and plants, you press them between a stack of books or inside a heavy book. Next, you cut a rectangular piece of clear contact paper about the size of a piece of notebook paper. You peel off the backing and lay it on a table sticky side up. Place the dried leaves and foliage on the sticky side and then cover the arrangement with white or colored construction paper, letting it stick to the contact paper. Now here is your finished project. There is one other fun thing to do with leaves that I call leaf sketching. All you do is lay a leaf or leaves down on a hard, smooth surface. Place a piece of white paper on top and using a pencil, rub back and forth. This will make a nice impression of the leaf and give your kids something nice to hang on the refrigerator. Just about any easy-to-grow vegetable like cherry tomatoes or radishes or even bush and pole beans will fascinate children if you allow them to plant, tend, and harvest right along with you. For more information on children's gardening or any other topic I cover on the show, take some time to explore our website at DIYnetwork.com. There you'll find lots of great project ideas complete with step-by-step instructions, or you can check out our gardening section for plenty of helpful hints. That's it for today's show, but be sure to join me back here next time as I grow and harvest more vegetables fresh from the garden.